All right, everybody, back with another one. And today we're going to be taking a little bit of a dive into the recently released JFK files. So I want to start off by saying, if you haven't noticed, I got a different microphone. Recently was experiencing some issues with the audio quality, and the last video might have had some significant audio issues. So if you had trouble hearing that, I apologize if the old microphone I bought. I think I spent like 20 or 30 bucks on it just to get the podcast started. And it just started to kind of fizzle out there towards the end. So I got a new microphone. Did a little bit of a test run on this one, but hopefully it works as good, if not better. Hopefully a lot better than the last one because it's actually a better microphone. But hopefully everything's connected and everything is audio is coming in okay, at least as far as I can see on my end. So hopefully this one works a little bit better. I'm trying to improve, the podcast for you guys and get the audio quality and the video quality better with every, few episodes. So hopefully this is a step in the right direction. All right, but we're going to take a look today. We're going to see what some of the, recently released JFK files have to say. I'll show you the link to that, or at least where you can find those documents for some of you who have not seen them yet. And I'm going to take a look at some of the, mainstream media or just the news in general, see what they have to say about it. There's a lot of mixed, um, you know, opinions and information on this one because I think as people dove in a little bit deeper and, really started to dig into the files, they could see that a lot of the information that was in there was stuff that we mostly already knew, and some stuff was new, maybe not that beneficial in terms of the American people, wanting to know, more just like internal memorandums and things like that. But so far, I mean, I think they said it was about 80,000 pages was supposed to be released. I think it ended up being less than that. They actually withheld some documents, I believe, and it's actually not um, just from the JFK, um, the year that it took place. It's a lot of different documents from that era, but even before and up until like the 90s and 2000s. So there's like 60 years of documents in there from all different types of, CIA people working in the government at different decades, different times. So a lot of the information is just, people routinely doing their job in the CIA over the last 60 years. And it's just like watching people work and take notes about what they're, investigating and what they're learning about, leads that they're chasing down for, information for one thing that can lead to another thing that can lead to another thing, and like, logs and all kinds of things like that, basically just like admin, type stuff, but at the CIA level. So, a lot of people were disappointed because, um, they felt that the information was not conclusive. It wasn't like they gave a one sheet that says, these three guys, killed JFK on this date at this time, and this is how they did it. And I think that's what a lot of people were looking for, hoping for, or waiting for. Um, and it seems like some stuff was withheld, so there may be that paperwork that it's clearly states exactly what the situation was, what the outcome was, and what the findings were. But so far, I've been taking a look at these documents. I'm only a few thousand pages in now, and it's apparently, tens of thousands of documents. So it's going to take, I think, everybody a long time to get through this stuff. And I'm just kind of looking through these myself, and I don't have like a staff that's reading them on my behalf and summarizing them. I'm reading them myself. So we'll dive into this a little bit today and take a look at it, but we're not going to go into obviously all 80,000 pages. But we'll take a look at a couple just to kind of give you an idea as to what you know the files contain. and just so you can get a better understanding of the type of information that's in them. And I also find it ironic that this is episode 63. And oddly enough, I didn't plan this. This is just the way it worked out. I was actually going to try and get the information from the JFK files in my last video, episode 62, but the files were coming out, I think a couple days after I had already, basically finished that podcast episode. So I would have never been able to get it done in time. So oddly enough, this is episode 63. Didn't plan it, and that was the year that JFK was assassinated, 1963, November 22nd. So I find it interesting, kind of a coincidence, but I don't really, believe in coincidences. So maybe it was fate. But this episode is, episode 63, and there's some sort of interesting, numerology there, if you believe that kind of stuff. So we're going to jump into it now. We'll take a look at some of the articles of the media and what they have to say about the findings of the JFK files. Then we'll look at the files themselves, and then we'll just, for fun, take a look at some video footage of some of the other media companies and what their take is on some of this stuff. So just to be completely unbiased, I don't believe in trying to sway, the audience into one way of thinking without giving the full context, without giving all the information. So we're going to look at both sides of the coin. Obviously, CBS is a very, very liberal news station, so we'll start with them, see what they have to say. JFK files related to assassination released by Trump administration. The Trump administration on Tuesday evening released tens of thousands of pages of the government document related to the 1963 assassination of President John F. Kennedy, weeks after President Trump ordered government agencies to make their JFK files public. The documents, totaling about 80,000 pages, had been released before, its sections redacted for national security. The declassified versions did not appear to contain significant new revelations about the assassination, based on an initial review by CBS News, but the unveiling of key portions of the records was cheered by researchers and academics who had long argued that the details in certain reports by the CIA and FBI should have been disclosed years ago. So then it just goes on to kind of talk about what's in a little bit of what's in the documents from their end, but basically they say it right there. Their opinion after reviewing it is that it doesn't contain any significant new revelations, meaning they didn't give, conclusive information about exactly who killed Kennedy, who the CIA or FBI or whoever was involved in the investigation believes killed him, and that many of these, media organizations are sticking with the original story that Lee Harvey Oswald was the one who killed him, and then I think Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald. So they're kind of sticking to that same story. So here's Forbes. The Trump administration releases JFK files. March 18th. National Archives on Tuesday released a massive tranche of documents pertaining to the assassination of former President John F. Kennedy after President Donald Trump vowed all records surrounding the JFK assassination would be publicly released. And then Trump said, I don't believe we're going to redact anything, adding that the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, was leading the effort to organize the release of the records. So that's another important thing. Tulsi Gabbard was basically the one that was in charge of releasing these files. So there's a lot of, conservatives and people who voted for the Trump administration and were happy with, Tulsi Gabbard coming on board for this position. And then when these files were released, there were a lot of people saying that the, deep state double crossed and they're hiding, information and whatever Trump and his team lied or whatever. But you're it's not like there's Mike Pompeo anymore blocking things. It's Trump authorizing Tulsi Gabbard to release the files, and she's the one that's in charge of making sure all the information gets out there. So I don't know if it's people just upset because they didn't get what they wanted, or if it's something else, but I don't think Tulsi Gabbard is hiding anything. She did the right thing and released the files and released them mostly unredacted. And it's not like she's secretly a rhino or anything. So there's really no reason to be mad at these people. They were able to release what they had, and this is what they had. And I think I know why maybe some people are mad because there are some redactions still in the documents. But if you look at the document and, somebody who does, you know, graphic design or things like that, where they layer, documents and they can actually redact them, through the computer, could look at these documents and see that the redactions were done on the hard copy back in, who knows, the 50s, 60s, 70s when they were originally redacted because, back then they didn't have computers like that. So what they would do is they would take a black magic marker and write over the text, write over the words. And I'll try and show one here in a minute. But that would be their way of redacting it because the people who got to see it before it was redacted, could be like the head of the CIA or, some top agents. They would read the information, retain it in their minds, and they were the only ones that would know. And that's how they did it. And then if they died, it died with them. So there may be some stuff in here that we're not able to reverse the hard copy redacting. Um, and we're just going to have to accept the fact that that's the way they did it because they didn't want this information getting out ever, especially after they, passed away. Now there may be a way to, use certain chemicals to reveal the letters and, words that are underneath the, black magic marker, but some of these documents are 60 years old, so I don't know how much of that would actually work out. But I don't think, people understand that everything's not going to be perfect. They are going to, or at least they did release the files, mostly unredacted, because that's what they were probably able to do. And anything that is still redacted is redacted on the hard copy. So you really can't undo that with a computer. Experts have said it's unlikely the remaining records would contain any smoking gun that changes the government's findings. The latest document releases during Trump's and former President Joe Biden's presidencies primarily surrounded the CIA's activities at the time, including some surveillance of assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. So they're still calling it for Lee Harvey Oswald, and that's Forbes. So they're basically sticking to that same story as well, based on what they found in the documents also. That was your more left-leaning news media companies. So now we'll jump over to the New York Post, which is a little bit more right-leaning. What the JFK assassination files have revealed so far, including apparent KGB probe into Lee Harvey Oswald. So that was basically the Soviet CIA at the time, um, looking into Lee Harvey Oswald as well, doing their research on, the assassin for JFK. Long awaited release, tens of thousands of files on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Tuesday night sparked biggest question I have as I go through is why were these classified for some documents do contain some tantalizing tidbits surrounding the tragic events of the November 22nd, 1963, uh, with one file exploring a theory that a small clique in the CIA being involved, as well as an apparent KGB investigation to determine whether assassin Lee Harvey Oswald was a secret Russian agent. So that would make sense because it sounds like then the KGB would want to know if Lee Harvey Oswald was actually one of their agents. And, also a lot of these secret agent organizations will try and make sure that, they don't have like double agents or triple agents in their departments also. It's all kind of crazy. It is a little bit like the movies, but definitely less cool, less glamorous. But that type of stuff does happen. So, former U.S. Army intelligence officer Gary Underhill fled Washington, D.C., very agitated one day the day after Kennedy was shot, and claimed to a friend that a small clique within the CIA was behind the assassination. The day after the assassination, Gary Underhill left Washington in a hurry. Late in the evening, he showed up at the home of a friend in New Jersey, reads the memo, quoting from a story in the contemporary left-wing magazine Ramparts. Less than 6 months later, Underhill was found shot to death in his Washington apartment. The coroner ruled it a suicide. And just a background on him, Underhill, a Harvard graduate and former U.S. Army captain who worked as a journalist and intelligence officer during World War II, said to be on a first-name basis with many of the top brass in the Pentagon and on intimate terms with a number of high-ranking CIA officials. So this is clearly a guy who was, you know, uh, possibly a close person on the inside, knew top members of the CIA, was involved in World War II, had an extensive background in, government to some degree. And that, sometimes people will look at that and say, oh, that's the smoking gun. That person is saying who did it. But this is anecdotal evidence because this is just one person's personal experience, allegedly, that he was telling to a friend. So it turns out that information probably came secondhand from the person that he told it to, not him, because he showed up, dead. He was assassinated, but ruled a suicide. So this doesn't mean that that's not the case. This doesn't mean that that didn't happen, that there wasn't a small clique of agents in the CIA, and that the CIA is the responsible party for orchestrating it. It doesn't mean the, other theories that the mafia was involved and that they're the ones who actually pulled it off because they had that type of ability to kill people, and get away with it to a certain extent. Um, it doesn't mean, that uh, any, if not all, of the theories aren't true. Even with the LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, being the person who, really was accused by many of being the orchestrator of the whole thing because he wanted, power and wanted to get in office so that he could pull off some big, things that would shape the nation going forward, and that's exactly what happened. So there's a lot of plausibility there as well that many of these people worked together because they all had a shared goal of taking him out of office because he was very powerful. He had a big following, a lot of people liked him, and he was going to make some changes in the government that these people did not want to see happen. And clearly, these aren't conspiracies. These are conspiracy theories, but they have a lot of weight behind them for a reason. Because even look at Trump, right? They tried to assassinate him. They tried everything they possibly could to take him out, financially, politically, personally, his reputation. And then when they just couldn't beat him and he was getting closer and closer to the election, they literally tried to kill him before the election. Not once, but twice, and maybe even three times. There was rumored about a third time as well. Um, and you don't know that it might have been more than that, but a lot of times the Secret Service will just um, not release that information because they don't want people to think that this is happening on a consistent basis and that Trump's life is in jeopardy. Also, sometimes it spawns copycats where people try to think, well, they failed, I'll do it, I'll be the one who gets him. So it doesn't mean that these conspiracies aren't true. These theories aren't actually facts. It's just not been proven yet from the documents that are released. And I also would find it hard to believe that, because you have to think about the context. The You're basically saying the CIA is going to rat on itself in these documents and then give it out to the American people. Now, I get it. A lot of the people who were involved at that time are dead now. So who cares if these new people do it because they don't, they have no affiliation with them. But you don't know. There could be somebody who, they're like a second generation CIA officer and their dad was around at that time or uncle or something, and was involved. You don't know. But also, um, like I said, I find it unlikely that the CIA would write reports about how the CIA was involved in this. They would probably not even let the agents who were looking into that write it because if it's coming from the top level, the boss is going to dictate to the employee um, what they can and cannot do. And what'll typically happen is an agent might get wind of something being suspicious, investigate it a little bit, and then go to their supervisor and say, "Hey, I think this might be going on. Um, you know, we should look into this. I'm going to set up, this operation or whatever to get to the bottom of it." And the supervisor will give them, the okay or not to do that. And not in all cases, I'm sure, in many cases, agents are able to just really do their job without having to go to their boss for everything. But something of this magnitude, I would imagine that um, the agents that were looking into this originally would go to their supervisor and say, "Is this something that's a real thing? Is this legitimate? Should I even be looking into this, or do we have any information on this? And does the government know, or does Congress know?" Like, I'm sure there would be a lot of questions that would be asked before they start drafting a bunch of documents saying, "Here's our research and investigation on whether or not us, the CIA, is guilty of killing a president." I find that part hard to believe that it would all be documented and written down. I'm looking in these files mostly for things like the original autopsy report, um, you know, um, uh, definitely information from um, members of the government that have looked into this and what their findings were. But I would find it less likely that that information would be in CIA documents because they're going to probably not going to incriminate themselves. Or also, there's a lot of agents that signed up to be in the CIA, and they're proud of that, and they think of themselves as heroes on some level. Um, for them to go and investigate the bureau, um, you know, might really uh, crush them because it would kind of make them realize that their whole career life was a lie. They get involved in something that was a big sham. And I just don't know how many people would even want to look into that because the fear of finding out it might be true. Not to mention, there's so much surrounding this because it's like the most popular conspiracy in American history. And it's so long standing that, I just don't know. Um, there's, it almost seems like the whole thing was a psyop, like the assassination, the cover up, and then the revealing of it. Because there's, when you read the documents, there's so many documents that have conflicting, not even conflicting, just information that crosses other timelines and other information. And, some stuff adds a little bit more context, and then some stuff creates a whole new timeline, new story. And it's all very confusing, and it's over a decade of time. It's over the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Like there is, documents in there that, CIA officers or whatever were writing memorandums about um, the Kennedy assassination 30 years after it happened. Um, so it's there's a lot to unpack, and you'd really kind of need somebody to sit down and spend a year or two just going through them, creating a timeline or multiple timelines that parallel each other, and kind of laying out and summarizing exactly what all of this is. Because also too, you're kind of hearing like it's almost like reading someone's thoughts, right? You're not reading a clear document that explains, um, you know, everything broken down in detail. It's snippets of something they're working on in that moment, and then a little bit more information they find out from a lead or, a memo that they wrote to somebody else, giving them a tiny bit of information, one or two paragraphs. It's again, it's so scattered and it's all very um, just extremely uh, daunting to just go through. There's a lot of stuff to unpack, and it's not even like it's all coming from the same person or the same group of people where you could put it together. It's from different people who work in the government at different times, different perspectives, coming at everything from a different angle. Um, you know, uh, it's really it's going to take time for this to get decided, for people to really go through it. And I've even heard people like feeding it to Chat GPT and Grok AI and, trying to see if the AI can decipher this stuff quicker than we can. And even the AI is getting confused. They're contradicting themselves. I actually did that as well. I fed it to um, Grok and I flat out asked it um, what what the conclusion was, like what did they find out? And it came back and said that the same story stays in place. Lee Harvey Oswald is the guilty party. He's the one who did it, and that whole situation, which does not make any sense because there's no way one person could kill the president of the United States and get past everybody, Secret Service, local police, um, you know, uh, the intelligence community, CIA, like when people are working on this stuff, um, the government hones in quick, especially with the NSA nowadays, mass spying on everybody, which by the way still has not been officially shut down. Um, so they still technically do that. Um, it's if they find out the slightest bit of somebody researching, questionable things like how to, take out a president or, how to, shoot a gun, this distance at a target this size, like ordering, specific rounds or, interesting, weird things online. When you do that stuff, the government hones in on you. They're not just sitting by, waiting for the person to show up on the roof with the gun. They already have a target on that person and they're watching them and they're, looking into them as a threat possibly. And, they have a head start on that person before they even know they've been made. So, yeah, I don't think it's possible for one person to, kill a president, a sitting president of any country, really. It would have to be orchestrated by a group of people. Now, that said, this does not mean that the conspiracies or the theories, rather, are true. There's enough data and information that's come out over the decades. This, it doesn't even really matter that these files got released. There's enough information that came out that kind of narrowed it down to um, it being a select group of people that probably worked together because they had a shared goal to take this person out and push the country in a different direction, which actually worked. That was kind of the big picture, right? It was America was going one way. America was doing excellently. It was post World War II. The economy was booming. It had just coming out of the 50s, and the 50s was like the most prosperous and greatest decade in American history. Still is till this day, by the way. It was a time when people were much happier. They had a lot more faith. They had a lot more trust in their government, and it was just a really different time. There was, way less crime. People were so much more, you know, humble and just got along with each other, and really just people were living great lives in the 50s. And then there was this push to take the country in a different direction. But JFK was like the sole person in the way of that at that time. He was trying to kind of bring the country back in many ways to even better days, trying to do things like restore the currency, like what's happening now in America, where he was trying to bring the money back to the Treasury Department and away from the Federal Reserve. He was trying to go after the mafia and take them down. He was trying to do many, many different things. And don't get me wrong, he made mistakes. He wasn't a perfect president. And, at the time he was a Democrat. Um, but he was trying to do a lot of things. And simultaneously at that time, the CIA was doing secret experiments. They were, working with the whole MK Ultra thing and testing drugs out on people. And then, shortly after he gets assassinated, all of a sudden you have the British invasion, the Beatles come in, the hippie movement begins. Now everybody's doing drugs in America. College campuses, the government and the CIA were actually involved. They were working with students and beta testing LSD and drugs like that on them, and that eventually made it into the communities. And that's where you get the drug epidemic that started in the 60s and 70s. Um, that's at a peak today with fentanyl. So it just kept growing and growing over time and getting worse and worse. You had so many different things, and it all kind of came to fruition right after JFK died. And there's so much more that went on, and that was like a shift at that time. And if you notice, and a lot of people say this, but especially boomers, they'll say that their childhood was like the greatest time, when they were kids. And a lot of them were kids in the late 40s because it's like, I think it's 1947 or 40, no, it might be 1946 to 1964 is the boomer generation time frame. So a lot of them will say they had the greatest childhood, and the last boomer was born in 1964. So that ended the childhood for the boomers. It wasn't until JFK was killed in 63 and then 64, like I said, everything shifted with the hippie movement and all that stuff, that um, the boomers' childhood had ended, and now they were becoming, teenagers and adults, and things started shifting in the country. And many of them still talk to this day about getting back to, their childhood again, their youth when life was better, it was easier, it was simpler, people got along. There was so many cool things that went on during those times, but it was amazing how like that shift. And I kind of started this podcast a little bit with the whole numerology thing, which is a little bit nonsense, but there is some truth to some of that stuff. Numbers sometimes do, line up and click. And it just is so interesting that the boomers ended in 1964 and the Gen X generation began after that in 65. And 64 is when the shift happened in this country, when everything really started changing. And, you just look at the country since then, things have gone drastically downhill. Because look at before that, you had, World War II, we won that war, and it was an amazing time for America because we basically looked like the saviors of the world. Not to mention, we had basically, become this world superpower in just a short time before that with the Industrial Revolution. So we were really on a roll. And then, like I said, the 50s was an amazing decade. Even with the Korean War, um, it wasn't even a big deal because World War II was so big that Korea was kind of, uh, in the shadows of that and didn't really seem that big of a deal. Um, and in terms of a war, it wasn't in terms of the battle. So, the 50s was an amazing era. A lot of people prospered and thrived. People had homes. That was that whole time period where it was like truly the American dream. You had a house with a white picket fence, two cars in the driveway, you know, a wife that stayed home and raised the kids, a husband that went to work. Everybody had savings and were able to take, vacations and, not everybody, don't get me wrong, not everybody gets to experience that part of the American dream. But the people who were here for a while, who were established, um, they got to live that dream. And that's where that, American dream concept really kind of, peaked was this idea of, that's the American dream that everybody really wanted is just to live a great life, just to have a home, have family, um, again, look at the baby boomers. They came out of that time period where it was the 40s. So the 30 was the Depression era. The 40s is when things bounced back because it was post World War II and America really prospered during that time. So you had the 40s, that was a great decade, and the 50s was an even better decade. So you really had a lot of economic prosperity, and you had a lot of uh, you know, great things that happened during those times where people were having a lot of children. So the baby boomer generation is known as the baby boomers because it was an explosion of childbirths. It was a baby boom, right? That's where that term comes from. So you had the most amount of children born in a generation as the baby boomers. At that time, and I think they still are to this day, um, that was the most amount of children born in a generation in American history. So people were happy, people were doing well, people were having a lot of kids because they felt they could afford it. They wanted a big family and they felt that things were good, things were safer, times were great. So it was JFK's death was the switch in this country. It was the switch that turned things from the greatest time to be an American to a downhill slide of everything great in this country until the present day. And it's literally was a slope down from then. Look at the 60s, the hippie movement, drugs. We started taking on another country's identity through the Beatles. They even called it the British invasion. It was an invasion of the British culture because they lost the war, the Revolutionary War, trying to conquer us. We went independent, went free, and they came back, almost 2 centuries later and invaded our culture. They conquered us by culture. Then you started having a lot of people who were into that type of rock and roll music. And again, like doing drugs. Then you had the 70s. Things got even worse. The music got worse. The rock and roll got heavier, you know, and the drug use got crazier. A lot more heavy drugs came out in the 70s compared to the 60s. The 60s was a lot more lighter and hippie and like peace, not war, love, all that stuff, but it was like, fake, not godly. And you did have good things that happened during that time. It's not like it was all bad, but if you look at the timeline overall, yeah, things did get worse. 70s, heavier drugs, heavier music. People were a lot more, families were fractured. Women were going to work more, leaving the home. The children were, not enjoying that family unit that they once had. It was still there, but it was the beginning of the downslide of that. Because in the 40s and 50s, it was like everybody was home, and the moms and the children, and the husbands would go to work, come home for dinner. It was a totally different time than the 70s even. And then in the 80s, it got even worse. You had a great time with Reagan, and also in the 70s too. Nixon did a lot of good for the country. Um, but there was a time when, things were good, but then there were things that were bad. And like I said, even like the rock and roll, the music got even heavier in the 80s. That's when you came out, you started hearing like metal, you know? That's basically around when that time of the evolution of rock and roll, it was at that peak of metal music. And you had the economy was down a lot in the 70s. There was a lot of economic hardship. There were times where people had to wait online for gasoline, and uh, people were financially not doing well. You had a lot of political stuff that went on too. Um, you also had America at this point now they were really invading other countries instead of just defending us and making sure that America was protected and remained the greatest nation in the world. You had us going into other countries and invading them and trying to, do nation rebuilding and all this stuff that, which is like foreign affairs that we're not supposed to have any, dealings with as America, constitutionally speaking. And then you got into the 90s. The 90s was like the most nihilistic decade of people just, really checking out and not giving an F about anything. And it was just a weird time. Don't get me wrong, I grew up during that time, so it was an interesting time to be alive, and there was a lot of cool stuff that we remember looking back now that, we talk about as nostalgic, but overall the sentiment was it was very void of life, very void of like love and you know what America had in the 50s and 40s. Um, people still had families, people still did get to enjoy some of those things in life. But by that point, the boomers were older, they had their children, and, things were totally different. The women were working, men were working, so you had both parents working. You had the divorce rate was extremely high, the highest it had ever been in American history. With the boomer generation, they actually hold the record, the most, divorces, highest percentage of divorces. Um, for a generation. And I think they still do hold that record today. Don't get me wrong, some of the generations, after them are, still kind of going through that point where they're not, finished growing. Maybe there will be more divorces to come, but I don't think so. I see a tide turning because Gen X was a little different. Maybe 50-50 there, but the millennials seem to be taking their marriages a lot more seriously because a lot of them came from divorce homes. So there's that fractured childhood and relationship with their parents that they're trying to, overcome that trauma and make up for it by having a better marriage than their parents had because that's what they always wanted. And then Gen Z is a little young still. Some of them get married, but they're still kind of young, so we don't really know how they're going to turn out just yet. Um, but yeah, you look at the 2000s after, 9/11, that was a horrible, horrific time for America. The war in Iraq. You had the dot-com boom and bust. You had the 2008 housing market crash. You had, hurricanes and, all these crazy storms and floods and just, horrible one after another thing. Really, really fractured political system and more and more rights from the Americans being taken away from them since the Patriot Act, in the early 2000s and uh, the Obama era. And then, when Trump came in, it was like a light at the end of the tunnel. It was like the tide was turning for America. And it was like we had one more chance. And many people truly believe this. It was like God's grace on us that He gave us one more opportunity to be able to, uh, you know, get to redeem ourselves as a nation. And, that was an interesting time. And we're still going through that now because this is the beginning of Trump's second term. So we're still coming out of this JFK era. We're still coming out of like this like 60 plus year curse on America that is now being lifted. So a lot of people are looking at these files and they're not looking at the big picture that I just laid out, rolling through the decades. They're just looking at what we didn't get. What this wasn't a definitive. Here you go. These guys did it. Go get them. But they're not looking at the big picture. We're going through a process in America where we're being healed from the downfall of this country that started with the assassination of JFK, and it's still continuing on this day. In fact, RFK's son, RFK Jr., is in the government now. How ironic. He's in the government now during specifically this time with this administration and during this administration that released the JFK files. Like all this stuff is not happening by coincidence. This is God. This is grace upon this nation to be healed and to turn back from our wicked ways. And God is in the process of healing our land. So, all this is unfolding now. So don't get discouraged. There is definitely going to be, more definitive stuff that comes out with this. It's going to take time, but America can't just have everything at once. Things have to roll out because things take time, right? And look at how long this downslide took to get to this point, right? So, all right, let's take a look at a couple more things here, and then we'll take a look at the files. So you can find the files release on the National Archives website. So it's archives.gov/research/JFK/release dash 2025. I'll try and put a link to it in the show notes, but I already um, shared the link and many of the documents on my X, Twitter, old Twitter, X account. So if you don't follow me there, definitely go follow me on X. I released a lot of this stuff already um, on there, and you can actually click the link. That'll take you right to the page where the documents were released. But this is where you can find them. It's on the National Archives website, and it's literally, if you look down here, it's 113 um, pages of the website, and each one of them has 10 PDF files on each one. And then each document could have anywhere from 1 page to like 500 pages. So it's a lot of information. It's spread out through all these pages. I'm up to 48 right now, so I've seen a bunch of this stuff. But we'll click on a few just so you can get an idea and see what some of this stuff looks like. So this is what one of them looks like when you open it. Now this one's a good example because if you look over here on the left-hand side with the pages, we're on page 1 right now. But if you scroll all the way down, you can see that this is a 407-page document. So obviously we're not even going to get close to going through more than a few pages. But this is a lot of what you will see, and I'll actually make it a little bit bigger. Now you have documents that are decades old. So a lot of the information, some stuff was hand crossed out. This is kind of the stuff that I'm talking about. Some of it's done with magic marker, at the time, um, like a Sharpie, where they just actually crossed it out, pen to paper. And this is just like crossed out by pen. So you see some crossing out here by pen. They actually did this on the hard copy. You can't unredact that. But a lot of the lettering is faded. It's been so many decades. These documents have crossed so many hands, and they've been in boxes and storage and all kinds of stuff. So they're not going to be in the best condition. But you'll see things like this. It'll say top secret information, December 31st, 1952. So this is actually like over a decade before the assassination happened. And this is a memorandum for the deputy director for Plain. And the subject is background material for Dr. Tyson's visit on Wednesday, January 7th. So there's all this like really specific information um, in these documents that pertain to a specific event or a specific case or whatever it is. And not everything is directly about JFK. So I think that, some people think that, every file in here is about the case of what happened to JFK. No, this is from the 50s. This is stuff that, was going on in the government in the 50s that some of it might have had to do with JFK, some of it might not have. It's all very maybe just convoluted and stuff. I would like the attached papers to call to your attention. Very good work that Dr. Tyson has done, which is generally not known here. The successful use of Emigres in making a calm and factual presentation to the American public of conditions behind the Iron Curtain is, in my opinion, the basis on which the crusade for freedom can run by the Heritage Foundation in the future. And then there's, all stuff about that. There was this, plan. There's like a breakdown of that. There's all these different things. There's stuff that talks about like, different, definitions and stuff or terminology or whatever projects they were working on. It's all just, you know, government documents that are, drawn up by people in the government who are working on things internally. And unless you're, in that department, you might not understand what some of it means. It's like anything inside of any company, right? Internal memos or stuff that make sense to the people who work at the company, and maybe not people who don't, right? So this one's interesting. Chief Political and Psychological Warfare, Dope Corporation with CIA. And again, if you look at the words, they're faded. It's hard to read. You could spend months going through these documents trying to find the needle in the haystack. Jump ahead a little bit and see, some stuff's a little clearer. Again, 1952, memo, fulfillment of requirement RDA 3345. Like, unless you work in the government at that time, you probably don't even know what the hell they're talking about. So, again, a lot of this stuff is just, internal stuff that would be hard for the average person to even understand what they're reading. Now, obviously, if you do read through this stuff, you could understand a little bit of it, and you could try and start putting pieces of the puzzle together. But there's going to be so many gaps, so many holes in a lot of this stuff. So you just have a lot of you know random information in here that some of it does go together. Some of it talks about Cuba. Some of it talks about situations going on in other parts of the world at that time and what those affairs were like. You jump over to this document now. It talks about the 201 dossier. Purging a 201 dossier is the responsibility of the desk officer, requires discrimination, recognizing operational operationally useful material rather than the simple distinction between official and unofficial papers. It will therefore place under the supervision of the records officer. Purging should be done periodically. So this is like literally just talks about, protocol. This is like internal protocol. And, Form 362, Form 1888. Like, if you don't work in the government at this time, you're not going to understand what any of these things mean. You're going to have to piece it all together. So that's why I said, like, this is going to take time for people to really go through this and figure out, um, you know, what all this is, how it ties in together, and what it has to do with the actual JFK assassination. But like I told you, I think my breakdown of that time makes a lot more sense and lines up with what actually happened. It seems more like a group of people, um, in very high places, um, decided they wanted their agendas carried out, and the one man standing in their way was JFK at that time. And they had an overall plan for the United States and how they wanted to see it go, and how they, wanted to change the course of our nation. Um, but that would have never happened if we didn't fall away from God. You know, God continues to bless us when we do the right things. And when we do the wrong things, he doesn't curse us, but he allows us to be cursed by the devil. So that's probably more likely what happened to this nation. People fell away from God. They got too comfortable with all the prosperity in America. And, we just came out of a big war of people killing each other, you know, even though murder is considered um, a sin and something that we shouldn't do. Yes, obviously, in those during those circumstances, it also says in the Bible there's a time for everything. So if that was what needed to happen in order to stop somebody from conquering the world and genociding mass amounts of people, then we had to do what we had to do, of course. And only the people who lived during that time will truly know if it was God's plan for that to be the outcome. But at some point, people got away from God, and the nation fell to hell. To basically what it was. And don't get me wrong, like I said, there were great times. There were good things that came out of every decade after the '60s. So it's not like it was all bad. But it's interesting that a lot of this stuff happened um, as a result of him being killed. And then even when his brother RFK, tried to fight and continue on, they killed him too. So, yeah, you can clearly see that there was an agenda for a while to push this nation in a different direction, and it worked up until God allowed Trump to pick up the torch again that JFK put down when he was killed and carry it forward for this nation. And that's where we are today. So we'll see how this all plays out. There are some people that believe that Trump was divinely appointed by God to be in this position, and that the proof of that is, everything that he was able to accomplish despite all the adversity, but also the fact that his life was spared multiple times from assassination attempts. So if you're in that camp and you believe that he was spared and put in this position on purpose because it was God's plan to restore the nation, then that's one thing. And there are some people who just um, maybe don't connect those dots and don't see it, but understand that nothing happens to God's people unless they turn away from God. Then God allows it because He loves us. But if we don't choose Him with our free will, then He will let us suffer the consequences of that. And that's just the way it is. That's the dynamic. You either choose God and live a righteous life, or you choose not God and by default fall away from him. There's just no other option. And I think that's what happened to America during this time. So, you know, these documents, they're great, and there's a lot of information that has to be disseminated and gone through, but a lot of it is, probably not that informative, probably not that helpful. Um, there is some stuff that you can clearly see, um, you know, definitely did contribute to um, connecting some of the dots and answering some questions that people have had for a while. Um, and it clearly shows that there are, bad people in the CIA that had an agenda and were working with other people that had agendas to, uh, do things and control the people the way that they wanted. It's always like a small group of people trying to control the masses. That's just the way it is and will be for probably the rest of the time. I'll jump into this now, actually. This is a perfect example of what I was talking about the documents being redacted on the hard copy. So if you see here, you actually have, you could kind of see the words, right? You kind of see that says September. And then this one looks like a dollar amount of 300,000. This is a little bit harder to see, but you can see that these were circled at one point, but they were also redacted with probably some sort of, magic marker, Sharpie or whatever on the hard copy. This is not a redaction from a computer. It would be a lot different looking. And some of the letters will still bleed through, especially if this was done on a typewriter because it's punched into the paper a little bit. So sometimes the marker won't be enough to conceal the letters. But these are hard redactions. So if there are people out there that are getting mad about the redactions, you can't reverse a hard redaction on a hard copy. It just doesn't work that way. You can use, maybe some sort of chemical test or, specific lighting that could, help reveal the letters behind the marker, but it's not always a guarantee that you're going to see everything clearly. And these are old documents, so some of them are very fragile. It might not be the best idea to, mess with them in that way because the damage might be irreversible. But you could make out some stuff. You can see some stuff here that, we can even zoom in on this one because this is pretty interesting actually. About 40 some nationality, I can't really read that, have received something, and at least 25 have traveled to Cuba in 1963. So that was redacted for some reason. Nobody knows why. Um, but it talks about U.S. Consul General told that 6 or 8 Cuban trained youths provide the technical support for this group growing terrorist efforts in Georgetown. Another source reports some Guyanese Guyanese were receiving guerrilla training in the interior of the country in November 1963, presumably for the newly formed Guyana Liberation Army. And you have this right here about Chile, popular revolutionary action for the communist-dominated popular revolutionary action front. Um, Usually reliable source reports that Che Guevara um, recently said, "Watch Chile, it will be the next Latin American country to enter our camp." More redactions here. Clandestine source. Chilean students reported in February that recently detained student said some 40 Chileans would soon be leaving Cuba to return to Chile. Then you got information about Colombia here. So some of these documents are interesting because they do talk about like crossover, operations that were going on in different parts of the world in different countries, and obviously the CIA was involved, and there was these communist revolutions that were being orchestrated. Um, Costa Rica Communist Popular Vanguard Party continues to send members to subversive training in Cuba. Some of these militant attorneys have begun training small groups of party members, but they appear to have no immediate plans for anti-government action. So they're just, training these people for a communist revolution, but they're not actually, you know, anti-government. Much of the pro-Castro activity in Costa Rica appears to have been directed against neighboring Nicaragua. So Cuban trained revolutionaries based in Costa Rica have occasionally crossed Nicaragua. So um, The police inspector at a town in the Pacific Banana Zone reported in early February that two unidentified Cubans who traveled from Panama to Costa Rica attempted to stir up Costa Rican banana workers in support of Panamanian charges against the U.S. Um, so it's just like a lot of it's like communist revolution stuff, people getting trained in Cuba and then going back to their countries to, have these little um, communist uh, parties that they grow and hopefully spread communism across these other nations. And that's another big thing. A lot of this had to do with the intentional spreading of communism across the world because communism is an evil um, governing system that is absolutely from the devil, like no doubt about it. It's the antithesis of what God wants his people to live under. And, this was clearly an agenda by many different groups in, many different governments and countries to spread communism. And it actually worked. Look at it today. Like I said, it started in the 60s in America. They got it into the college campuses and they, started brainwashing the students to accept it. And then it made its way into the hippie movement, rock and roll. And then you had a lot of the boomer generation, get into communism and be open to that stuff. And then that got, worked its way into the government. Now you see there are actually members of our United States government that are open communists. They're openly admitting that they're communists, which is funny because many decades ago, there was a witch hunt in Hollywood for anybody who was a communist and they were blackballed from the industry and they got in a lot of trouble. Their reputations were tarnished. Even if they just attended one Communist Party event when they were younger in their youth in college, they got found out about and they were blackballed from the industry. So there was a time where even Hollywood was anti-communism. And now today, you have communism in the government, you have communism in the schools, you have communism in Hollywood, you have communism in so many different areas of, our country and in the world really. And this is a more of a social war, but also a psychological war to try and convince everybody to live under the rule of communism. And America has always been anti-communism. If you look back to like the Soviet Union and the Cold War, that was a big, anti-communist, situation. And now here we are just, 40 years later, and you have, members of our own government that are openly declared communists. They even have a Democrat Socialist Party, which is basically communism. So it's really crazy how things have gone today, how far they've gone, and how things have really shifted from the complete opposite 30, 40, 50 years ago to, being the opposite of what it is today. Um, yeah, so it's really interesting. I was gonna go into more stuff, but I think I might have to do another video in the future. Maybe we'll look at some of that other stuff. But um, I saw InfoWars posted some interesting things. Maybe we'll take a quick look at that just to have that uh footage. It's a short video, so we'll just add that to this, and then I think we'll call it a day.
There's this document I call the Eagle 2 document. It purports to be from the Federal Bureau of Investigation to Senator Edward Kennedy, classification top secret, written on July 7th, 1989. During the tenure of Richard Helms as director of the Central Intelligence Agency, decisions were made by the director with implied approval of the Oval Office to draft a blueprint and put into motion a plan by which the CIA could have as much funds as and when needed without the knowledge of Congress. The 5 experts picked were Edward Lansdale, who ran the CIA activities in Vietnam, William Colby, who was put in total command of the blueprint operation when enacted, George Bush, who asked to receive approval to have his top aide Richard Armitage to be brought aboard, and Lieutenant Colonel Robert Ferreira, a top CIA asset. The master plan called for the CIA to enter into the drug smuggling business in total and complete fashion. General Lansdale would handle all the distribution network and collection services within the military in Vietnam. See, this is why all veterans came back addicted to heroin, because they were sold it by the CIA. The operation was given the name Eagle 2. Here's where it gets crazy, folks. Before the operation was really off the ground, Colby started his phase of elimination of dissidents, and he did so under the code name of the Phoenix Program. Colby became insane with his power, and before he was finished with Phoenix, over 20,000 suspects were executed, and over 2,500 U.S. citizens were accused by Colby of being collaborators, and they vanished. That was too close to all being made public, so Helms, who in the meantime had formed a totally strong relationship with Baron Philip du Daphne, who represented the real capital of the world, the Rothschild Empire, decided to stop Operation Eagle 2 and start another clandestine money-making operation and leave Japan. Baron du Daphne, by the way of information, later took complete control of the international organization, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, headquartered in Paris, France. So this is how the deep state works. This is how it was formed. This is what we mean when we talk about the intelligence community being international, it being co-opted and actually controlled by people that aren't technically in office of CIA. They're shadow controllers. If you're a guy and your wife manages all of the money, how are you going to cheat on her? How are you going to go have a nice steak dinner with your mistress if your wife's going to start asking questions about the $200 bill on the next credit card statement? What you need to do is go do a little something on the side to get some cash of your own so you can pay for your nefarious activities outside of the oversight of the money manager.
All right, so that was just a little take from InfoWars about connecting some of those dots and figuring out what might have happened, but um, it makes perfect sense. I think that the biggest things here are the know, government, the CIA, the shadow government, all these organizations that wanted to see America go a different way, band together to take out their biggest opposition because he stood in the way of them getting their agendas, uh, you know, fulfilling whatever, goals or whatever things that they want to do, but more importantly, shifting the United States into a different direction. And the two biggest ways they did that was they invaded this nation with drugs, which we are still struggling with today, and they brainwashed the people into not only forfeiting their rights, but accepting an entirely different form of government, which is basically socialism and communism. And we see that today. We see that with a lot of the things that they've instituted in the government over the last 100 years, and from the 1900s until now, with the central bank, Federal Reserve, changing the way that our money is and totally inflating the economy for the last 100 years. Taking our dollar off the gold standard. Um, you know, Centralizing education, like I spoke about in my past video with the Department of Education in the 80s, um, programs on us. And then a big part of it was the drugs, was getting people to be, mentally unstable because everybody's on drugs, that they willingly and passively accept all this stuff. And if you notice today, it's gotten much worse. Back then there was a lot less people that did drugs. There was a stigma around drugs. So mostly the younger people would try drugs, and then every once in a while you'd have like a housewife that was, going out of her mind, being home, bored. She'd, take like painkillers or something, sleeping pills to be able to get her to relax. Um, and you did have things like that. But then we got into a world where today, and it's still going on, they legalized marijuana in many states. And now if you notice, there are so many people who are smoking pot or taking gummies or doing all these things that never would have in the past. I'm sure you know people in your life that you would have sworn would have never done drugs or smoked pot or, had anything to do with marijuana, that ever since they legalized it, all of a sudden that person is doing it now, or at least open to the idea of it. And it's weird how you can actually have someone change their beliefs and their opinions just based on taking away the stigma around it. That is really what a lot of the psychological warfare aspect of it was convincing people that certain things are okay, that even if they go against their morals and values, if you could take away their morals and values, they don't have anything to go by anymore to measure what's right and wrong. So they start becoming open to anything and also getting people to, you know, forfeit their rights and trade in the constitutional republic that we have for socialism and communism, for all these government programs, social security, even unions, pensions, and things like that. Not completely, but to an extent, there is socialist, ideas behind that stuff that, came to fruition from socialist countries. We got a lot of those social programs from other countries that were socialist, and we just, allowed them to be brought over here to America, and then all of a sudden, implemented them. But anyway, we don't need to go into all this today. We'll definitely do more videos on this because it's a very interesting topic about what the downfall of America was, what happened over the past, 60, 70, 80 years, and how America ended up where it is today. But I do see light at the end of the tunnel. I do see that God is blessing America again and giving us grace. So hopefully we can continue it on. I think the only way out of this is if more and more people become Christians, born again, and turn back to God, turn back to God through Christ. Will this nation be saved? Because it does say if we repent and if we turn from our wicked ways and turn back to God, He will, heal our land. And that's what we need in America is for us to turn back to Him so He can fix America. And I think we've started to see that now. But we'll see how things go. And we'll see if they release any more information about the JFK files. There's a lot that's, still coming out. And, I'm not able to get to everything conclusive today because there's stuff that's still being found out. Other people are still reporting on things that they found. I'm still reading things, so it's going to take a little while to go through all this stuff. But uh, as far as I can tell, no big breaking news to where it's earth-shattering. Just a little bit more information about stuff that people already kind of believe or surmised from just decades of people looking into this conspiracy. So that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. The podcast is on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, and we post some short clips on Instagram and X. So don't forget to follow me there. I also posted a lot of the links to some of the documents on my X account. So take a look at the links in this the show notes for the X account, so you can follow us and get the links to the actual FK files. And stay tuned for the little ad at the end of this video. I don't know if some of the platforms I'm on get a lot of ads, but this is the only ad I do. I don't do ads throughout my video like any other people. I just have one ad at the end, and it's all just stuff that we're selling that we work on personally. A children's book that I wrote, and published, and it's available on the market on all the major platforms and in bookstores. Um, the apparel shop that we have, percentage of profits go to charity, and our Amazon storefront with a lot of great stuff is on sale right now. So, check out all that stuff. And that's really it. Stay tuned for the next one. All right, everybody, just want to take a moment to promote my children's book. This is Little Boy Full of Love. That's me on the back. And this is a little sneak peek on the inside. It's a great book. It's a children's book. I actually wrote this for my son, and it's available right now on Amazon, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Indigo, bookshop.org, and a lot of other online platforms. But more importantly to me, it's actually available in a lot of bookstores throughout the country. You can find out which ones are closest to you on my Instagram page. We highly recommend that you shop local, buy from a local bookstore. So if you are looking to, get a children's book for you or anybody you know, or even with the holidays coming up, it's a great time to, buy a children's book as a gift. Definitely get it from a bookstore that's local to you. But if you absolutely can't get it from one of the bookstores that are currently carrying it right now, and we're in about 15 or 16 different states across the country, so it may actually be in your state and it could even be local to you. But if you can't get it from the physical bookstore, check out our Amazon storefront. The book's available on there right now. And like I said, with the holidays coming up, you may want to do your Christmas or Hanukkah or holiday shopping early, and you can even order it from our Amazon storefront and ship it directly to whoever you're gifting it to. But it's available on those platforms, Amazon storefront and bookstores and other websites that I mentioned. But I want to take a moment here to look at the storefront just to give you an idea of some other stuff that we have available on there. These are products that we highly recommend. They are things that we use in our daily lives, and it's all organized by category. So it's a lot easier to, shop for the holidays and specifically for things that interest you, particular categories available right now, many different items on our storefront. If you can see here, 61 items just in women's apparel, fall decor, because right now we're in fall, 26 items, kitchen items, baking specifically, things for around the house, children's toys, even stuff for parties. If you're trying to save money on a party and throwing your own, occasion, you can even buy some cool gadgets here to help you, put on a better party. Um, health and wellness items here, even stuff for Christmas. And there's the book right there. So you can get it from the storefront. You can get it from the bookstores, like I mentioned. Um, but it's available on all these different platforms. It's really easy to find and gift to somebody. Also, I want to show you the apparel shop, and these are some clothing items that we actually produced. So if you're looking to get some cool apparel items, uh, shirts, hoodies, long sleeve, short sleeve, um, leggings, even accessories, cell phone cases, women's makeup bags, fanny packs, coffee mugs, all different types of stuff, even some, art, all different categories here, apparel, homeware, accessories, drinks, even digital items. It's all on this store, healthybodygoodssoul.com. Anything that pertains to you or somebody that you're looking to get a gift for the holidays. A lot of great designs on here, a lot of cool designs that we actually custom created. Stainless steel water bottles, especially now with the fall and winter. A lot of cool hoodies and long sleeve shirts. This is a really cool one, I think, for women. The original Be Your Soul apparel, that one's actually really popular. People tend to like that. This one's one of my favorites. The free shirt. It's the American flag and it says free and that says not property of the United States government. That one's pretty cool. Got all different types of tank tops, hoodies, long sleeve, short sleeve, tote bags, coffee mugs, even some items for kids, backpacks. So if you're the type that likes to, plan ahead, I would definitely recommend ordering from the Amazon storefront or the apparel shop within the next couple of weeks to get everything in time for the holidays. Use code SAVE15 on the apparel shop to save 15% off everything on the storefront. So order within the next week or two, and you'll definitely have everything in time for the holidays. Definitely check out all the links to everything, the Amazon storefront, the book, and the apparel shop in my bio on all my platforms, Rumble, YouTube, Instagram, Spotify. But you can also find them in all the show notes for every episode that I post and get all your orders in time for the holidays. All right, that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. It helps the channel continue to grow. And put in the comments things that you would like me to talk about and make videos on for the future. And I will definitely do my best to do that. Stay tuned for the next one.